G'day. Welcome to the AgriCoach podcast for families on the land who want to grow their family's wealth and prosperity across the generations. I'm your host, Ben Law, and I'm the financial bloke. Most people on the land love the land. They love their animals and they love the rural lifestyle. But the reality is that to be a good custodian of the land, provide financial security for our family, and provide an opportunity for future generations, there needs to be a profit. The fact is, we're all in business to make a profit. And if we aren't, our business adventures will be painful and short-lived. Profits are also the reward for all our hard work, and it's the fuel that builds resilience, supports growth, and allows families to become more prosperous both now and across the generations. Then why are so many families on the land either unaware of what their profit is, unaware of what drives profit in their business, or at worst, feel like profit could be a dirty word? To unpack with us today the key ingredients for profit and family agribusiness success is Kate Burke from Think Agri. Kate's a highly experienced independent farm consultant with a PhD in agronomy. Kate spent time in the corporate sector as a commercial manager of one of the largest grain producers in Australia, and she knows what it takes to run a profitable farm business. Kate founded Think Agri after identifying that there was a need for astute, experience-based advice when considering where to deploy your investment capital in the ag space and also understand how to run a profitable, sustainable business. Now, I'm excited to hear from Kate today, and I've got my notepad ready because I think I'm going to learn a lot. So without further delay, welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks for having me.
No, it's great to have you here, Kate. I know we started this conversation possibly getting close to almost a year ago, and we've been trying to find a time to make this happen. So I'm really happy to do it. And it is your birthday today, so happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the birthday wishes. Getting to the stage where it's actually a privilege to have another one.
I know what you mean. Now, Kate, for everyone listening, can you just give me just a real quick summary of your background so we can all get an idea of who you are?
Okay, so I run a advisory practice called Think Agri, which is actually 9 years old today. I'm going way back. I'm farm bred with a dash of city breeding. Mum was a Melbourne girl. And ag science trained, and I've worked in applied research, education, consulting, so all in the broadacre grain industry. And I worked in corporate ag for a few short years before starting my own business, Think Agri. And what I like to do is really work at that intersection between all the good things out of corporate business practice and all the good things out of multi-generational sort of intuitive farming and try and blend the two so people can have better farming lives, really.
Yeah, and so you've written a book, which we're going to get into later on, which I was quite fascinated by, and that's probably where I want to start off, is something that came up out of our original discussion when we started. And it really caught my attention, Kate. You said something along the line, so I hope I'd get this right because I'll make a complete fool out of myself if I don't.
I'll trust you.
But you said something along the lines of, I think it was rainfall, farm size or scale, and commodity prices are not the biggest determiner of whether an agribusiness will be profitable or not. Now, following last year, which was a pretty tough year for a lot of people across the country, with it being drier than usual in a lot of places, we had steep falls in livestock prices and steep increases in input prices as well as interest rates. And I reckon probably there's a lot of listeners out there that are probably thinking, hey, this Kate lady, she's possibly out of her mind. Now, assuming I got right what I said, if rainfall, farm size and commodity prices or prices aren't the biggest determiner of profit, what is, Kate?
Yeah, good question. And I guess the context of that comment was for broadacre farming where you might have more than one enterprise. I just add that context in. It's actually the combination of all those things and how it's put together. So where that statement came from was looking at probably 20 or 30 different studies on why are some businesses always better than others? And what I kept finding was that didn't have to always be the biggest business, and it wasn't always those that got the best price. And over a given amount of rainfall in a year, you could have a huge variation in outcomes. So essentially what it is it's productivity that drives revenue. So it is revenue generation, and it's doing that cost effectively. And often it's the overhead costs that are the big thing, not necessarily the operating costs. And the main thing is that it's the people who are making the decisions. So it's the individual farms. And there's a study, I didn't actually make this stuff up, there's a study in Western Australia where they looked at 249 businesses over a period of 11 years. And when they tried to explain the differences in performance of all those businesses, the number one statistic was the individual characteristics of the farm. So they call it the farm effect. So it's basically you, Ben. That's what makes the difference.
Yep. So the people.
Yep. And the decisions made by those people and that farm business.
Because what I was going to say is I've been intensely fascinated over the years, Kate, when you'd see potentially farming operations or grazing operations where you can have even family members, side by side, or people in the same district with roughly the same resources, same industry. Yep. One can be absolutely thriving and the other one can be struggling, shall we say, or variations in between. And I've always found that really, really fascinating. And for me, what I've found, the word I always used was mindset. You see a completely different way of running the business. Do you find that mindset, the way people think, is part of that, the piece of the puzzle?
Absolutely. That's basically the crux of it, because that then drives everything else. And when you think about it, some of this stuff's learned, but some we're just all born different. Like, to me, it's really logical. You think about back when you're in your prep class and the different people in that prep class, and they're all good at doing different things. There was the girl in there that's really good at art. There's the young fella in there that was, smart and good at sport, and, there's everything in between. And so it makes sense that if you take that through to business performance, going to find, that same effect and same differences all the way through. But somehow in society, and I guess I'm going to get sort of big picture here and a bit philosophical, but I think in farming we look down upon ourselves and think that people in the business world are smarter. So we've looked towards this business practice first model, and so it's either got to be, numbers first, or it's, if you're just love farming, it's got to be farm operations and skills first. And in amongst all that, we've actually forgotten about the people side of things. And I don't know about you, Ben, but I'm finding in this last 5 years, post-pandemic, all of a sudden the business world has worked out that people matter, and all the new leadership material coming out talks about, head, heart and gut and leading from the heart and all this stuff that some leaders in that field have been, going on about for years, but they weren't getting taken seriously in the corporate world. And I think the other issue we face is sort of stoic country people. We don't like talking about ourselves. We don't like the uncomfortable conversation, so we avoid all that, like the plague. So those that do really well are just naturally good at that stuff. And I guess it comes down to, if I was going to pin one human trait, it's probably emotional intelligence and self-awareness and the ability to relate to other people are the two characteristics that describe what I call it. When I used to drive around as an agronomist and just wondering, what is it that makes that person better at this than the other person? And quite often it's, the ability to manage themselves and their ability to manage others. And to do that, they really need to know themselves really well. And there's lots of literature out there that show that now for both business in general terms, but also for agricultural businesses.
It's interesting, Kate, because we always are very careful on which families we help out. And the reason is we want to have the biggest impact and help the people that will really benefit the most. And I remember quite a while ago, I was going through and trying to say, well, what are the key indicators of whether I want to help a family or can help a family? And one of them was values. they must have strong family values and matching values to the way I am. But the other was what I called and documented as a growth mindset. So it was this constant mindset of going, okay, we don't always do things perfectly. The problem isn't with other people, the problem's with me. And how do I do things better? And I found that if you find someone who has that mindset, the world's your oyster. You can essentially do anything you basically want to put your mind to. But if you've got a very fixed mindset, well, then it's very hard to change. It's very hard to evolve, and it's very hard to be self-aware. Do you sort of have anything to add to that, Kate? Do you agree?
Yes, that's the Carol Dweck work and from the US and her colleagues that have since evolved that work. And the one good thing I reckon is that values can't change much, although they do evolve as you get older. You value different things, and the influence of your parents on your values probably diminishes as you get older. But the exciting thing about mindset and that fixed versus growth is you can actually learn ways of undoing the fixing and becoming more open. And I guess that's one of the things I try and work, because I love a challenge. I try and help people sort of unnail, I suppose, their mindset and pull out a few nails so they can be a little more flexible. And things that can help unnail that mindset are curiosity and humility, and derailers or things that sort of contribute to the mindset being a bit stuck are often fear, and the harder ones are ego and arrogance. Like it's pretty hard if you're stuck with that. But building self-awareness can even, push that aside. Like I know in previous work lives when I didn't leave my ego at the door and probably didn't perform my best. And so through some of the questioning exercises that I do, it actually really helps them think about, I give them a list of 60 questions about you, the family and the business. And it just shifts their mindset a little bit. And one of the work I'm doing at the moment is these farm business resilience workshops through the federally funded Future Fund and administered by Ag Victoria in Victoria. And we had this workshop, there was 30 people in the room, and a lot, what are the problems, what are you working on? And it's the usual thing, employees, succession, rah-de-rah-de-rah. And at the end of the day, what have you learnt today? I think I might be the problem. So that actually through the evolution of just one day, they started to see it through the eyes of other people, not just their own. And through a few different exercises that we did. And that's the bit that really floats my boat about the work that I do with people, when you can see that shift and get them to understand how our brain works and our thinking processes and all the things that we can do to help just shift the needle of the mindset, so in the end they end up with better livelihoods.
So if you come across what I would call a high performer, okay, so someone that's really kicking some goals, running a highly profitable business, it's sustainable business, it's intergenerationally successful, and you had to describe the leader of that business, how would you describe them?
Well, every one of them's different.
Yeah, because the reason is I want to look out for them. If I was on the lookout, how would you describe them for me?
Yeah, every one of them's different. I actually don't like the term high performer, so I like the term effective performer.
Okay, yep.
But that's just a little personal thing because I have a, oppositional defiance to terms that get used a lot.
I think I'm pretty much the same, Kate. I like to make up my own terms.
Yeah, exactly. So what are the traits of an effective performer that happens to be high performing in their cohort of people? They're technically proficient, or they run a business that's technically proficient, so they know what needs to be done to actually generate the money. They know where the money needs to be spent, and they're not afraid to spend it on those things. They're disciplined and motivated to refrain from spending on stuff that they would like to have, but it may not make the best sense for the overall business in the long term. So, they don't need to have the shiniest tractor or the greatest genetics. They've got enough self-discipline in that. They're very good at thinking ahead, but not too far ahead. So they're not, just stressed out and thinking ahead all the time, but they can anticipate things, 3 to 6 months in advance. So when interest rates started to go in a direction it hadn't been for a while, they start having conversations about what does that mean for our business, or when the weather conditions aren't going so well, like they're the guys in WA last year that would have been thinking really early on about, we've got a lot of things not going in our way at the moment, and what do we need to do about it? Just that ability to have foresight. And often on the people side of things, often it's subconscious and intuitive, but they know how to manage people and manage themselves. They're easy enough to relate to. Quite often they're quite humble. Like, you wouldn't know that they're running squillion-dollar businesses, and they're fair. They haven't got a complete sort of scarcity mindset. You can have businesses that are operating very high-performingly from a financial and production point of view, but they may not be happy as people, and their families may not be happy, and they can be really hard to do business with if they've got a sort of a scarcity mindset that, I don't want to give that away because someone else, might do better than me, and things like that.
That's a really important point, because I've had interactions with families over the years that have been quite wealthy, Kate, and done very, very successfully. But the way I described them was they were mean with their money. It was okay for me to make a lot of profit, but no one else can. So they'd always screw their employees down. They'd always screw their suppliers down, their customers, their professional advisors. They'd be really tough on, and they might make a few more bucks out of things in the short term, but they don't long term. There's that real scarcity and fear that someone else will do better than them.
Yeah, I think that having a generous mindset is a real profit maker, and a long-term sustainable profit maker, because people will work for you. There's some great examples I know of that where businesses that I've worked with or observed, they're prepared to pay well, but also to do other things for a family. I heard a great example of a fellow called Bo Longmire, who gave a presentation at the same conference I was at recently, and he told the example of one of his staff needed to go to Melbourne for a specialist appointment, so a 3.5 hour drive. Her partner couldn't go because of his work commitment, so Bo drove her down. Things like that, those non-tangible, really good gestures, as simple as offering them a refreshment on a Friday afternoon, or just being generous of heart and mind, I think, is as well as a pocket.
Yeah, but I'm guessing they can't be a pushover, can they?
No. You need to be assertive. Definitely need to be assertive, and you can't throw it away. And there is a risk, I think, at the moment because of the employment situation we've got, where people might flounder a little bit to, or even fawn to their employees because they're so worried that they may lose them. You've got to remember who's driving the bus and who's taking the risks. So I think there's a balance there between being, an assertive and firm leader who expects, good service, but at the same time being a good and generous human as well.
Because that's, for many people listening, I'm sure they'll be in the tractor or in the car and they'll be going, how the hell does that create profit? If I've got a generous mindset and I'm fair and I'm humble, how does that generate profit? But I can tell you, I totally agree with you, because I think, like you mentioned before, it's a combination of all those factors creates a good strategic leader of the family business.
Yeah, well, you think about what makes you perform, and you go back to your teenage self, particularly fellas, you would have had classes at school that you just hated being in, and there'd be one teacher that, it could have been a science teacher or a PE teacher or whatever, that you found yourself basically complying and doing what they wanted you to do. And it comes down to they treated you well and they didn't just tell you what you were doing wrong the whole time. And it's like, think about sporting coaches. What does sporting coaches, how do they get the best out of their players? Like the days of giving them a serve, still plenty of time for the occasional serve. But, guys like Craig Bellamy haven't had the success they've had by giving people serves. It's because they're good relationship managers.
Yeah, they're able to manage it. So, Kate, you mentioned they know where they need to spend the money and they're not afraid to spend the money. And that's one thing I noticed over last year. I had a few families that I work with that even though beef prices had dropped 60% and interest rates had tripled, they were still spending money. And I can remember these were good operators and they, people that knew them would be going, I can't believe they're still building those yards or fencing or putting more water in and stuff like that. And it's absolutely paid off once the rain and things normalised. Is that a real rare trait, would you say, Kate?
Oh, it's hard because that's about dealing with uncertainty and knowing. What I like to talk about so there's two bits to that. There's being willing to still put capital into your business or the infrastructure in your business so that you can capitalise on opportunities. And there's also willingness to optimise the productivity that you've got in any one set of conditions. And there's that nuance of understanding, right, we're in a dry spell here, but we've still got a certain amount of productivity out there. We've got feed out there. We know we can contain and we've got grain. And, you can work out basically what your productivity could be or your potential productivity for any one set of conditions. Like that's just maths. So in cattle and sheep, people like John Francis and Sandy McKern are really good at working out those numbers. In cropping, it's using water use efficiency equations to estimate yield potential. And then if you've got a crop portfolio of, 20% canola and 50% wheat and barley, and there might be a legume of some description in there, you can do some maths on a paddock by paddock basis and come up and say, all right, if we get this amount of rainfall, this is what our production's going to be. If we get, more than that, we're going to have this. And you can actually do those sums all the way out to come up with a dollar revenue number. And if you can do that sort of maths, it gives you a set of options where you think, okay, so even if we have a decile 1 year, our production could be this. Now, do we have enough inputs there to meet that production? What are the things we need to do to protect that potential? What do we need to spend on fungicide, for example? All of those things, and with livestock, we've still got to drench them, we've still got to do all these things. And that basic animal and plant husbandry. And the guys that do that and know that they need to protect their revenue potential, even in tough times, tend to, it's a challenging thing to do. It's so easy just to batten down the hatches. And there are extreme times you need to batten down the hatches, but more often than not, the people that make more money actually spend more than the average in terms of variable costs. But they're good at making sure their overhead expenditure and their capital expenditure is commensurate to the scale of their business.
No, that makes perfect sense.
So it's cost management. I guess flexi spending is the word I like to use. So not being someone who just has to spend money, I see that as a bit of a trait that doesn't always augur well, and you would see that too. I also see that underspending and scarcity mindset as a trait, but if you can be a flexi spender, know when to hold them.
Yeah, know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yeah, that's the one. I
think there was a lot that we were thinking about walking away or running last year.
Well, the other thing about all that is it's the ability to put that into perspective. And, if you think about where the beef industry's been And the livestock industry, the meat industry's been for the last decade, it's actually been a pretty good decade all up. And at some stage there's going to be price corrections. And when they happen, it's not much fun. But history tells us, particularly for multi-generational farms, it's not the first price correction.
And it won't be the last.
And it won't be the last. It's just something you have to deal with and push through and come up, change your strategy or adapt your program to push through it.
Another thing I find, Kate, and I've been reflecting on this morning when I was preparing, and profit in many ways can be, for many families, I think, they may not be able to articulate this, but I think there's a bit of an ickiness to it, in the sense that a lot of people, when you talk about we've got to maximise our profit, we've got to be working on profit, a lot of families just don't focus on profit. It's not the driver behind what they're doing, and they don't measure the numbers and they don't look at it. And the reason I know that is because every person I used to deal with as a financial advisor, or even what I do now, is I'd say, well, what's the business profit like? And I almost in every occasion get a blank stare across the table and go, I don't really know. I've done some budgets, but I don't know.
Yeah, I get that too. And these are really well-run businesses and profitable businesses.
And then, so that's the first thing. So whereas that's completely different when I talk to people outside of the agricultural industry. So if I deal with someone who's got, maybe even they serve the ag industry, they've got a non-farming, they've got a farm services, they might have a grading business, or they might have a machinery sales business. They generally know their numbers. They know the profit they're aiming for or what they've got. That's the first thing is don't know the numbers or don't talk about it. Number two is we have this real language, and I'm going to throw financial advisors and accountants under the bus here. I swear some days, Kate, that there's going to be a voodoo doll everyone's got out there of me, and they're poking whenever I talk about this, but I mean it really respectfully, because there's awesome lawyers, awesome financial advisors and accountants out there. But I know back in the day when I did it is we used to talk with families when we did tax planning, and you'd sit in a room and the first thing that'd come out is, Kate, geez, I've run the numbers and you've got a big profit this year we've got to deal with. It's a problem. And that was the vernacular and the language. It would always come out. And of course, clients would come in and they'd had a good year and say, look, you've had a great year, but we've got this profit to deal with. And, we've got some work ahead of us and the tax department's going to want some money. And instantly it was this real negative language around it. Do you find in those, for the lack of effective performers out there in the marketplace, do they think like that or do they think differently?
Again, no two people are the same. So effective performers that are prepared to pay tax, probably end up being better off in the long run and make better decisions. That I've got effective performance that are a bit hung up on tax and will go and, blow money on equipment and machinery because there's a 100% write-off and things like that.
Which is, just to clarify for everyone, that's all gone now. So if you're thinking that's what you're going to do this year, be very careful.
Yeah, exactly. That has all gone. And by God, there's a lot of sheds up in the Wimmera as a result of that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That will be okay in the long term. One of the questions I asked in my 60 questions is, what drives your decision-making? Are you driven by tax planning or are you driven by trying to make a profit? Some interesting stats out of one of the data sets from the West Australia, again, Farmenco data set. I just had a look last night at their benchmarking results, and they actually, as part of their benchmarking, they list how much tax is paid as well by individuals. And, the top 25% performers pay more tax. And one of my favourite quotes from a client is, losing money is not a good way to save tax.
Well, that might be a great quote, but I think a lot of business owners actually subscribe to that theory, I'd say.
Yeah. So it is, losing money is not a great way to save tax. And I think that's one of the mental models that comes out of our industry that doesn't serve us well. So the way I look at things is using a framework that I learned from a guy called Russ Harris, who's actually a psychologist and educator, and he really brought to the he's the author of The Happiness Trap, and he brought to the public this type of psychological thinking called acceptance commitment therapy, or he's even written books about it for for business world calling it acceptance commitment training because, he's worried that people are going to get thingy about therapy. But he talks about this choice point. And the choice point is you've got your goal. So, the overall bigger goal for farmers are usually leave a legacy, build wealth to be able to leave that legacy, have family dinners at Christmas and generally leave the land better than I started with and enjoy myself along the way. So the choice point is to think about, is the decision I'm about to make going to take me towards my goals or away from my goals? And I reckon getting fixated on tax more often than not takes you away from your goals than towards your goals.
Is the goal to pay less tax or to achieve your strategic objectives?
Yeah, so you've got to have a good life and have your family respect you and still be talking to you when you're 90. If that's your goal, then I reckon don't get hung up on tax, particularly, and this is more in your area than mine, but particularly when it messes with the ability to deal with succession, when people are worried about capital gains tax and those things. So they just keep putting off succession because they don't want to pay tax. And what's the price of having your grandchildren know each other? A $500,000 tax bill, I reckon, spread over a 50-year period is pretty cheap investment if those grandkids all grow up really respecting the legacy of their grandparents.
I totally agree. One of the things that I find in effective performers, Kate, is that the difficulty with agriculture is that you're not only leading the business, but you also have to lead the family. And that adds in a whole lot more complexity. So not only do you know how to be a good farmer or grazier, you've got to technically know everything. You've got to run the business, but then you've got to run the family strategically. So you're not only thinking about the cattle, the crops, the water, the interest rates. You've got to think about, well, how do I retire? Eventually I want to retire. How do I build enough wealth off farm to retire? How do I protect what I got? If I fall off the perch, if mum falls off the perch, if dad falls off the perch, if we run into some strategic problems, how do I deal with marriages of the next generation? How do I do the succession planning? How do I protect what we've got? There's all these other what I call beyond the farm skills that have to be learnt over time. And unless you've got a growth mindset, you're not going to ever get to that level.
Yeah, and it's hard. And that's why there's such a gap between those that have dealt with succession and those that haven't, because that stuff's really overwhelming. And that's the stuff we haven't given enough thought to about preparing and training our industry on those skills. If you've gone home at 16, like was quite often the case in my generation, and may have done a farm apprenticeship at the local TAFE, or may have just gone home farming with dad. Dad went home when he was 14, and you don't necessarily get taught those human leadership skills. And again, sometimes, people are just naturally good at it and naturally good at thinking in systems and managing the complexities. But if communication's been a difficult thing in your family for generations, then it's really hard to be able to, you can't do this stuff on your own. And that's where being able to put your ego aside and ask for help, that's a really useful skill about getting. One of the effective performance skills that I see is getting good people around you to fill those gaps in, to recognise what you're good at and what you're not good at and what you need to help with. I think that's really important.
Yeah, you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself, which is, I think, a Jim Rohn quote, which I love. And I always talk about your professional advisors, or the people that help you. Because I see in the effective performers, I see they're very, very willing to get outside help. They're very willing to find the right people. If they find someone and they don't turn out to be the right person, they just move on and find someone else. And what used to fascinate me just in my old life, Kate, was investing off farm. The amount of people that would say, I have this argument with them. They'd say, look, I don't want anyone to help me outside. I can do it better myself. And then they don't do anything. nothing actually happens. So they've got to be humble enough to say we need some outside help. Number 2, find the right people. And number 3, be able to lead that team.
Yeah, and on that, we talked before we started recording about accountability and responsibility. I think there's a real distinction when you're using outside advice. If you're going to use outside advice effectively for your business and your family, you're not foregoing accountability and responsibility for the decision making. If you're planning to outsource the decision making by getting in advisors, it may not end well.
And the words I use there, and I've used for years, Kate, is you delegate, don't abdicate the responsibility. So you're delegating to say, hey, I need some help with this. So a consultant, an agronomist, a bank manager, an accountant, I delegate that work to be done, but I don't abdicate responsibility, because that's a really dangerous thing then, just saying, I trust that person, I just leave it to them. You can't do that. You can't lead like that. You still have to manage your team. So, Kate, we're getting close to sort of running out of time here, which I'm always frustrated about when we get to this point, because I'm learning so much. But I just wouldn't mind you making a comment. You said to me off air last time, you said that farm profit across the industry is really variable, and you think there's the capacity for many families to double their returns or double their profits. Why do you think that's the case?
It's a good question, and I'll make that statement based on my analysis of lots and lots of data sets and varying data sets, so different industries, beef, broadacre in general, broadacre cropping, dairy, looked at some horticulture data sets. I've looked at data sets curated by financial business management consultants, data sets curated by accounting firms, data sets curated by ABARES. Regardless of who curates the data set and what industry they're in, if they segment that data and report, say, a median or average performance across their data set, and then they tend to report either the upper 20% or upper quartile, upper 25%, so top 25, top 20, let's just call them the upper group. When I look at that data, there's this pattern that occurs where the upper group are making roughly double the money that of the average of the whole data set. So if you think about what that means 80%, so let's say it's a top 20% reporting regime, that means the other 80% are making half the money as that top 20. So if we've got 100 farm businesses, 20 are making double. And these are, businesses within a similar amount of rainfall and all those sorts of things. There will be a cohort in that group that may not have the capacity to do anything different.
And that could be a scale limitation.
Well, it could be scale, but scale's not necessarily the driver of profit. It could just be resources in general, for whatever reason. It could be human resources, whatever reason, there's an issue there. There'll be a cohort within that group that may have the resources, may have the capacity, but for all the reasons that we've talked about in the first half hour of this podcast, they just need to tweak a few things on the dial so that they can optimise people, profit focus and productivity and take responsibility. There could be a major shift, and often it's the productivity piece because it's the bit that varies the most. In broadacre agriculture, when you've got a year in grain farming where your potential to produce is double what it normally is because the rain gods have been kind, that's the year you need to really, do all the right agronomic things. And in cereals and canola, will be putting out extra nitrogen to get that yield. So I've seen that in just a tweak in their rotation or a tweak in how they run their business really can make a massive difference, to eliminate the tax mindset, for example. So they're actually spending money where they need to spend it rather than spending money on capital items to try and save tax. And there could be 1,000 different reasons. Since I made that statement and wrote the book, Ben, I have been thinking about this a lot more, and it goes back to your statement that not everyone's in it for the money. You know, we need to make money to keep things rolling, and because we're often in a capital appreciation business with our land side of things, that can cover up the sores a bit. That can be the Band-Aid. But there'll be often the complexity to maximise profit is really hard. I really like the term satisficing, and it's a term, Adam Grant talks about it. It's an economics term from middle of last century, I think. And I think farmers are actually pretty good at satisficing and working about what profit level they want and what they need to do to have that all-round better livelihood and better legacy. So it may not be going for absolute full-toed odds in profit, but finding that sweet spot where, you know, your business can still grow and you can do all those things, but you're not doing it to the detriment of, you know, your mental health or family relationships.
And that's a really important point, because this is where we have to remember that, or remind ourselves that farming is a family business mostly. You know, it's done from a family point of view. Most people have intergenerational aspirations, whereas the typical, you know, person that owns the tyre store down the road or the local mechanic shop, they're generally not thinking intergenerationally, so they're wanting to grow profit. And I think what we have to remember is that there's a debit and credit system. So if you're putting everything into the business to try and maximize profits and get the most possible out of it, but you're debiting against your health or you're debiting against your family communication, relationships, etc., that comes at a cost. And so it may not be sustainable. Now, I know a lot of people argue you can do everything, and maybe some people can, but invariably there's going to be those ebbs and flows, and there's going to be times when you'll need to invest into the family, and there's times when you need to maximize profit and run your business more efficiently. And I've got a beautiful example of that at the moment, Kate, where there's a family who doesn't have a succession. There's no succession going to happen on the farm because the kids aren't interested, but they've been squeezing every last bit of profit out of that business for the last 20 years, raising the children and educating them. And they've got to a point where they're sort of 5 or so, 10 years away from retirement, and they've just started pulling back on their profit expectations and running the business easier so they can have time to go away and see the grandkids, they can go traveling, they can have holidays. And for them, profit maximization isn't their number one objective anymore. Obviously, they don't want to lose money and they don't want to just have this mindset of, we'll reduce profit to get extra time, but they're focusing more on the balance in their lives.
And it doesn't have to be either or.
No, I agree, yeah.
One of the findings at a lot of these studies where they've looked at all the profit drivers and then done qualitative and sort of social interviews was that the more effective performers actually tended to spend more time in their community, be involved in sport, be involved in off-farm activities. And I think that's really good to know that, you know, there is a point of diminishing returns. Like if you work every Saturday and Sunday for 50 years, you're probably going to be, you are less efficient, and it's hard to do that quality thinking. So I think one of the things we tend to, and this comes down to identity, we identify there's this farming badge of honour, hard work sort of identity in the community, and it can be a bit of a trap. And the effective performers that I work with are actually reasonably good at, you know, they'll do the work when the work needs to be done, but they're reasonably good at, you know, going to footy on a Saturday afternoon if it's not cropping time or harvest time for other sport, and they do get to the kids' school events and things like that. And I reckon this current, like the generation younger than me, are better at that than my generation was or the generation before me was.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I got myself in a whole lot of strife, Kate, with someone once where, you know, they consider themselves really hard workers. And we were having this discussion about something needed to be done in the office. So there needed to be some strategic planning done. And I remember saying to them, they kept prioritising what I called the $30 an hour jobs, you know, fencing and stuff like that, which needs to be done, don't get me wrong. So I'm very understanding of that. But I remember them saying, one of your family values is hard work, but I actually think you're being lazy. And I remember they looked at me and said, what do you mean we're being lazy? We're working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We are not lazy. And I said, yeah, but the job that you need to be doing, the hard work you need to be doing is back with the family. It's the strategic planning. It's the talking to the accountant about tax planning. I said, that is the hard work for you. Sitting on a tractor for another 5 hours a day or for an extra day a week or doing the fencing or mustering, that is technically the easy stuff for you. That's the stuff you enjoy. The hard work is the stuff you need to be doing. And I remember to start with, they were pretty cantankerous, but once they thought about it, they went, yeah, you're right. We default to the easy stuff.
Yeah, and that goes back to that emotional intelligence and self-discipline and being motivated to do things that may not necessarily be the stuff you want to do. My mother had this really annoying saying, it's not what you want to do, it's what you got to do. And I think that applies. Well, mind you, I'm sitting here on my birthday chatting to you, and I'm technically on holidays at the moment thinking I'm probably not practicing what I preach, but I actually really enjoy this, and my husband does respect the fact that I enjoy this sort of stuff. So, I reckon a few of my clients will be stirring me up after they hear this podcast and realise that it's been recorded while I'm technically on holidays.
Yeah, it's funny. My grandfather used to say, don't do what I do what I say.
Yeah, authenticity is one of my values, and integrity. So I actually try and practice what I preach, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah, maybe not so much today.
No, that's okay. That's okay. As you said, you enjoy it. Kate, we're running out of time now. You've written a book. Great book. Can you just tell us a little bit about the book and where people could find more about you and the book online?
Yeah, sure. So they can find more about it just by going to thinkagri.com.au and following the links to the book. It's an audio version as well as a hard copy, and you can buy the hard copy through those links. Yeah, I wrote this book called Crops, People, Money and You, The Art of Excellent Farming and Better Returns. And basically what I was trying to do was consolidate all these ideas that I'd put together over 30 years and put the evidence that I'd gathered into a consumable, readable format. And I wanted something that sort of joined the dots between that sort of whole of business complex system that we work in, the people and the productivity and the economics, but how they all interact together. And I couldn't find a publication like that. Any publications like that tended to be a bit more academic, or they were lighter publications on, how to grow bees or something. So I wanted to do something that was for, larger scale farms, not hobby farms, and joined all the dots together, but in plain, accessible language. And I really enjoy writing. I'm lucky enough to enjoy crunching numbers and writing. And so it was a bit of an indulgence project as well, really.
Excellent. Well, I think you mentioned, we were talking about before, you seem to be getting a lot of people, or a lot of the information in it is transferable across all industries. So it's not just related to cropping or any particular area.
Yeah. So cropping's really a metaphor for productivity, as in technical productivity, production of produce. So I've spoken to the tea tree oil industry. I've got a gig with the tomato industry coming up. I've spoken at livestock forums in the past. So it's really those principles are transferable outside of agriculture too. Be technically good at whatever the area of expertise is. Have a profit focus, but also have a people focus. And I think if you can get people productivity and profit and look through those lenses as a way of evaluating whether a business is plausible and viable and sustainable, you'll go a long way to being successful.
And if you can say people, productivity and profit 3 times real fast, you'll be in a good position.
Yeah, one of the things I learnt during the audio book is writing for narration is different to just writing for reading. And there were a lot of tongue twisters. So I'm actually thinking of writing a second book, and I'm going to call it 50 Shades of Hay.
That'll get some traction.
It's going to be about this thinking stuff and the thinking skills we need for running these complex businesses.
No, I think that's a great idea, Kate. And so the book is available in audio as well.
Yeah. Crops, People, Money, You is. So went to a recording studio a couple of years ago, so you can grab that off Audible or any of those other platforms. But there's also links to those via, if you just go to my website, you'll be able to follow the links.
Excellent. Now, Kate, 2 last questions. What's one piece of advice you'd give someone if they're sitting there and they go, I want to make more profit, I want to be more sustainable, I want to have a better life? What's the one little quick piece of advice you'd give them to start the journey?
Ask other people what they see when they look at you and your business.
And ask the right people, I'm guessing.
Yeah, ask a range of people, not just the ones you want to hear from.
Perfect. Kate, so the last question I like to ask everyone is if you could go back in a time machine, back to say when Kate was, say, in her mid-20s, 25, and you could sit her down and you could have a conversation, you could give her a little bit of guidance and advice, what would you tell young Kate?
Oh, my goodness, there's so much. There's a whole book in this. I think the book is partly that, Lessons for My Younger Self, the one I've already written, and the one I'm about to write will be more of that. Take more risks, back yourself, and worry less about what other people think.
That's some good advice. I think every episode pretty much we get back yourself in some way, shape or form. That's mine, but it comes up time and time again, is the back yourself. So, yeah, I think that's some pretty good advice.
Particularly for young women.
Yeah, excellent. Well, look, Kate, I've really enjoyed that today. I like to take notes. I have a page full of notes here I'll scan and put in my little library. I really appreciate it. I think you're doing a great job. Thanks for reaching out. And we'll put in the show notes, thinkagri.com.au, if anyone wants to reach out and hear more from you. And I'm guessing you're also on, I know we first met, I think, on LinkedIn. So you're on LinkedIn and the socials as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the two main ones I use for work.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I'll leave you to go and have a great birthday back to hubby and enjoy the rest of your holiday.
Thanks very much, Ben. Cheers.
Well, how do I summarise that down? Now, I'm just going to run through because I think this would be really valuable. If you don't think it's valuable, finish up for today and I'll see you at the next episode. But I just wrote down all the things that Kate said a high-performing family leader would look like, or what she called an effective performer, is number one, mindset. You've got to have a right and work on your mindset. You're very willing to get outside help. You're assertive, but you've got a generous mindset. You're generally innovative. You think with an abundant mindset. And yes, I know I keep saying mindset, but I'm just going through my list as I wrote them down. You're fair. You're humble. You're a good manager of your time. So you have downtime for yourself. You have time to play with family, etc. But you also have time for strategic thinking or just thinking about things. Next, you're forward thinking. So you work on your foresight, being able to predict what's going to happen in the future, which is difficult. You're technically proficient. So you must be a really good farmer or grazer. You must be a good operator on the operational side. You've got strong family connections. If you don't have a strong family or you don't have good relationships, things are going to break down. You're disciplined not to spend on what you want, but rather on what you need. So she mentioned about having the big shiny new tractor when you don't maybe need the big shiny new tractor. And finally, you know where you need to spend the money and you're not afraid to spend it. So they were just some really good points. For me, I just think if I was in your position, I'm listening, thinking, okay, how do I make more profit? How do I become more abundant? I'd be working on becoming a really efficient producer and getting outside help so you can maximize your profit. Number two, I'd work on being really aware of what your profit is. And so you know what it is and what you're targeting and what the levers are to be able to adjust that. And finally, I think I'd be working on your mindset. And what I mean by mindset, from my point of view, is you must have a growth mindset. So the problems that you have are not with other people or outside of your control, the problems with you. So have a growth mindset, an innovative mindset. And if you can do that, you're going to be well on the way. And finally, have a read of Kate's book or have a listen to Kate's book. I found with books, both audio and written, is that even if you get one or two little gold nuggets out, it can be worth your time. You're sitting in the tractor, you're sitting in the car listening to rubbish, you might as well listen to something that you might learn from. So that's it for today. We've had a great episode. If you've got any feedback or anyone you think might benefit from this episode, we'd love it if you could share the wealth and wisdom. Righto, thanks very much for joining me, investing your time. I'll see you in a few weeks' time.